Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andrew Winterfeld, and today I am joined by,
Yours truly, Jeremy Chiwatiko.
and today we are going to be discussing the civil rights movement, but specifically the before, the during, and the after events of the civil rights movement during World War II. Now, it all starts off, we're going to talk about the before here with these two gentlemen. Okay, we see these two gentlemen right here, A. Philip Randolph and his good friend Walter White, lead a march on Washington together. Now, this march on Washington was held as a protest to discrimination in defense industries and the armed forces. Now, this actually worked very well because this caused current President FDR to issue Executive Order 8802. Now, this executive order banned all discrimination in the government and defense industry employment system. Let's see that right here.
So, continuing on with Executive Order 8802, this order actually helped FDR establish the Fair Employment Practices Committee, or FEPC. Now, this committee, their whole thing was just to investigate complaints of job discrimination based on their race, their color, their national origin in employment jobs, but mostly in the defense industries. So, the whole committee was just to investigate any racial discrimination when employing employees. So during World War II, this man right here, James Farmer, actually co-founded CORE, or the Congress of Racial Equality, with a bunch of other college students. Now, this was made very early on, but they become more prominent later. I promise, just remember this guy and this organization. But this organization's whole shtick was to peacefully protest, like a sit-in, which is just where people would sit in a restaurant where they wouldn't be serviced but not give up their seat. So it was just peaceful protest, no violence, easy. So in 1946, Irene Morgan, that beautiful lady right there, did a Rosa Parks before Rosa Parks, where she wouldn't give up her seat in a public transportation bus. Now, this was against a Virginia statute where all public transportation vehicles were segregated. So she had to sit in the back, in the back, got that, where, and basically she was arrested. And this case actually becomes prominent later. Just remember this case too. And yeah.
Now we're going to be talking about a man that really helped move the Civil Rights Act forward, and that man is President Truman. Now, President Truman wasn't there on the front lines protesting with everybody else, but what he did, what he pretty much could do was sit behind his desk and sign executive orders. Now, the first executive order was Executive Order 9808. Now, this was established in 1946, and this established the President's Committee on Civil Rights. Now, this committee was made up of 15 members whose only task was to determine how current law enforcement of federal, state, and local governments could be improved to safeguard the civil rights of people in America. Now, these two executive orders, 9880 and 9881, kind of work hand in hand together. Now, what these do are assure that there's fair employment practices and equal opportunities in the Army. Now, next, another very important civil rights activist and leader, actually, you've probably already heard of. His name's Martin Luther King Jr., also known as MLK. Now, what Martin Luther King Jr. first did to kind of put him on the map was his boycotts of the Montgomery public bus transportation. So he did this so other African Americans can ride on the bus without segregation and sit in any seat no matter what. And he did all of this peacefully. Now, peacefully, he believed in nonviolence since it would break the violent cycle between African Americans and non-African Americans and bring peace through reconciliation. Now, another thing he was very well known for was his I Have a Dream speech held at Washington, D.C., as you can see here. And this speech impacted the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act in 1965. Now, a very important quote that has still been used to this day, and many have taken away from Martin Luther King, is to judge a man not by the color of his skin, but by the content of his character.
So Brown versus Board of Education, another Supreme Court case that actually helped out with civil rights movements, where the main quote of this case was separate is not equal. So this case actually declared that segregation in schools was unconstitutional. So now all schools had to be integrated, where they had mixed schools instead of it being an all-white school. Segregation is gone, every school is mixed, but the South did not like that at all. They wanted no part of it. They didn't want to follow it at all. So they would rather close down their schools than desegregate them. They would fire their black staff and educators, and they would actually replace them with more white staff, so that even if the school was desegregated, they would still feel white empowerment. So CORE, that's right, it's back again. Told you, remember this. In the 60s, that's when CORE starts doing their peaceful protests. So like I said, restaurant sit-ins, they're really, really important. This is when more restaurants, Andrew, click it. So this is when restaurants started to become desegregated, because people of color actually sat in places where they weren't supposed to be serviced, but they would not give up their seat. So they would just peacefully protest by sitting in a seat where they wouldn't be served. And this actually helped more restaurants become desegregated. Another way of protesting were picket lines, where basically they just drew a line with their bodies, locked arms, and just wouldn't let anyone into the building. And this was just a boycott for the unfair wages between black and white people. But their crown jewel of protests were freedom rides. This was basically just filling a bus full of civil rights activists. And in 1947, they actually sent out one of their first freedom rides when the Morgan versus Virginia case was out in the open. I told you, remember the case? Told you it'd be prominent again. So freedom rides were actually to support these types of cases that would just help segregation not be a thing anymore in public transportation. So this would help desegregate public transportation in the South specifically. So in the 60s, that's when they really started to just start ripping through southern states, southern cities with these buses. And the Boynton versus Virginia case was actually at this time as well, which was a very similar situation with Morgan versus Virginia. And they would just ride through cities, but this time they were met with violence from the police, from the KKK, from other people who didn't agree with them. But the thing is, these freedom rides were actually televised, so people saw the violence that was issued against these peaceful protesters. And the public actually ended up turning against Southern segregation and helped civil rights activists in the South.
Finally, what this all led up to, all these protests, all these civil rights activists and leaders, executive orders, the whole nine, everything led up to this, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, as you can see, current President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. And what this did was pretty much everything that the people were asking for. This ended public segregation and banned employment discrimination based on everything, race, religion, sex, national origin, everything like that, banned it completely. And as you can see on the screen there, that is a very, 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 very rough draft of what we think it probably looked like right in front of Lyndon B. Johnson's face as he was signing it. And yeah, that pretty much concludes our presentation. We thank you guys for watching very much. We hope you learned something new or reinforced information that you already knew. And overall, we just hope you like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.